All right, we can go ahead and get started. So thank you all for being here. Second exam, a little tougher than the first. You guys did pretty well in the first though. So I have faith in you and I'm hoping that this can be as helpful as possible. Stop me along the way if you have any questions and we can work through it together or go into more depth about anything in particular. But with that, we can get started. So I've kind of commented into the VBA code here, the questions that go along with the practice exam. So you can follow along in code as we go. I can always pull up the actual practice exam if needed though. So to begin with, you need to place your command button on the worksheet. Okay, you should all know how to do that. You go to insert or you go to developer and then insert your button. Make sure you assign it to the macro. Okay, is everyone here good on that? Okay. So now the first thing it says to do is to read the anchor cell from cell A1, right? And so this is a common, well, first I'll just type with range. And now I'm wanting to get the cell that's specified in A1. Okay, this is one of the most common mistakes I saw in exam 1 was whenever it said get the value in cell A1, you guys always just referred to A1 as a cell you were looking for. But if you see here, it's in cell A1, there's a value C4, and that's the value that we're interested in. So you have to include another range to get to that value. Range A1. Does that make sense? So here, if I just said range A1, it would just, it wouldn't work properly. But then if down here I have range A1, I specifically want to use this C4 value. Does that make sense, everyone? Yes. I would not put a dot value because this is a with statement. And so I'm wanting to leave it open-ended so that throughout this with end statement, I can use those open dots to then use the properties. So like you have your with range, you leave that open so that throughout you can use dot offset to attach to that. You can use dot value to attach to that. So are you saying within here should use dot value? That would work. Yeah, that's fine. Yep, there's multiple ways you can do it. So that way works great. Yes. This is just a way that you can easily find out what different things are equal to. So like we'll go over this later, but like if I'm looking for the ASCII value of the character lowercase a, I can just do a question mark, ASCII a, and it returns that value. The question mark is just what basically tells it that you're seeking a response from it to specifically what you put in, all right? If I just put ASCII a, nothing happens. So you go to view and then immediate window. All right. The other great thing is debug.print. I guess, yeah, we should go over debugging real fast. So if I was to get rid of this, I could do debug.print right here. Then if I was to run this, it would return sales, which is exactly what we're looking for. I guess I should pull up the practice exam so you can see that. But it's saying it's going to range A1. It's taking in that value C4, and then it's going to range C4. And what's that range C4? Sales. Does that make sense? So debug.print is very helpful. And the question mark in the intermediate window, the immediate window is very helpful. That's good with everyone. I use debug.print, I think more frequently, or I did on exams, just to quickly check. Just make sure that when you use debug.print, you actually like go back and correct it to what it's supposed to be. So here, remember to put back in your with statement. And then at the very end, I'm going to put end with. I may need to end it earlier, but I just want to make sure that I do have an end with somewhere so that my code isn't messing up. Okay. So now it says, clear the column next to the top right of the anchor cell. So the anchor cell is this C4 value. And so I have my with statement already in here. I'll go ahead and unindent this. But so I have my sales range. So I can say dot offset, and it says next to the right of the anchor cell. So the anchor cell is C4, so I'm looking to clear the column to the right, which is column D. So I can say offset, how many rows do I want to offset? Well, it doesn't really matter. I don't want to offset any rows, let's say. And then how many columns do I want to offset? Well, I want to move one to the right. So I want to move one in the positive direction for my columns. So I have dot offset 0, 1, and then I can say dot entire column dot clear. That's on your summary sheet. So here, if I do that, you see how D4 just cleared. All right. Next, it says write the word predicted in the cell immediately to the right of the anchor cell. Well, it's just basically putting predicted back where it was, so that it'll clear all the values, but keep the header there. And so similarly, you can say offset. Remember, this is from the anchor cell because I'm within the with statement. And so it's going to be 0 rows over from sales and 1 column to the right. So 0, 1 dot value is equal to predicted, right? If I go ahead and run that, predicted comes back up. So far, so good. Is everyone pretty comfortable with this most basic use of offset? Yeah, okay. So next it says to read the cell from 1 row above the anchor cell. Okay, the number of months to use in the moving median. Okay, so here, the number of months to use in the moving median looks like 3. And then it says also store the number of months of data provided. Okay, so here, to go back to answer your question before we started, this is where it's fine if he defined variables, you want to use them a little differently, you can do that. So I kind of adjusted those a little bit in this practice exam. But here, first where you need to get our n in median value. And so first you need to declare that. So it's important that you dim your variables, dim n in median as integer. All right, and then now, remember my anchor cell is sales. So if I want to go up 1 row, I can say it's dot offset 1 row up is 1 row in the negative direction, so -1, and then 0 columns moved dot value, and that should return my 3, right? So if I step through this code, let's see. Oh, he defined it, right? Oh, I defined it up above, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. So here, if I step through this, you'll see my n in med is 3. Okay, so again, this is just simple offset. And then n months. This is a little bit trickier just because you're now dealing with the actual range. And so you can say the n in months is going to be the range of, okay, so now we're essentially looking for this value, right? How many months there actually are. You could take either row, it doesn't matter which one. So here I can say, the way you define a range, the easiest way for me is I take the top value of the cell, I take the bottom value of the cell, and I use the function range, right? So I have range, open parenthesis, top value, comma, bottom value. So here I have range, I want to get the first value, so I can say dot offset. Remember my anchor cell is still sales, right? So I can go ahead and define my top value of the range to be this value right here. So it's that dot sales value dot offset. And then I'm going how many rows down? 1 row down and 0 columns over. And then my bottom value of this range, well, this could be any value, right? Because he could give you any number of months. And so here, the easiest way to declare this is just dot offset. And then you can say, oh, actually, okay, so sales is the predictor. So you can do dot end XL down, right? So that'll take you from sales to the bottom value that there is right here. And then you can end it there. And then just to test this, I'm going to do dot select to make sure I didn't mess up on anything. And so we can step through this and see that it's selected the proper range. Okay, so it didn't ask for the actual range. What it asked for was the number, right? And so, sorry, here we go. So it didn't ask for the range. So what I can say is dot count, and that will return the number in the range, the number of cells. Okay, is everyone good with this range, first value, comma, last value, where inside you can use the offset Does that, yeah, everyone's good? Okay. Yes. So here, if you had like, if this was your range, so let's say this is range A, you could say range A dot columns dot count, and it would tell you 2. Or you could say rows dot count, and that would give you the number of rows. Yeah, here this should work the exact same. Dot rows dot count. Oh, maybe it's just rows. Maybe you cannot. Because oh yeah. Yeah, so it must just be because let's see here if we do. Yeah, so here, see that works. The only reason it didn't work is because you have to set it equal to a variable for it to store the value. I can't just randomly say, like, because I just had this in here, it was just basically a random line of code that said 9, which made no sense to VBA. So you have to set it equal to a variable. But yeah, rows.count is fine. Or anything you want, just .count is fine, because in this case, it was just one column. Yes. Yes. Yes, it is. So because it's asking this n months, it's asking for the number of months. And so so it's the range and it's starting at a value of 1 row down from sales. So it's starting right here. And then the last value is it's starting at sales, and .end XL down just goes down and gives you the last possible cell. Yes, correct. Because this is saying from sales go down 1 row over 0 column. So it's starting here and then it's going down to this cell, right? So the first part of the parentheses gives you this cell. The last part gives you this cell, which is what defines this range. So it is important to note that some people sometimes think that .end XL down will take you and return this range, but no, .end XL down just returns the last cell that's there in that column. Yes. Yes. This is from the same. The wording here was confusing for like the n months. I think it said at first like get this value and it'll be n months. So I just clarified it on mine. So this goes back to like your example or what you were asking earlier, which is like if it's confusing with the wording, just change it. So like here I changed it to n in median because that's easier for me. Yep. Okay. All right. So now we get to the main part of the question, which is asking you to use formulas. So here, let's go ahead and get started. So it's saying place formulas, a median formula using relative addressing in the next column to the right. I guess I should make this a little bigger. Okay, so we're doing a median thing here to calculate the predicted sales using the moving predictor. Okay, so you all should know now, he's probably going to ask you for a moving predictor. You had it in your homework, right? So in your homework 5, I think it was. So the way that it works, the first predicted sales will be for n+1, the n+1th month, okay? So the easiest way for this is honestly to look at that Excel file. Oh, I don't have the practice exam pulled up. But to look specifically at what he gave you for the practice exam. I don't have it up in front of me, but do I have it? 2020. Yeah, right here. So here with the moving average, or here in this case, the moving median, you can see that it's not going to start computing it up until the 4th value. And the reason is because this value right here, this 494, is taking the median of values 1, 2, and 3, and then putting it here in the 4th value, right? So this should look very familiar from homework 5. I would expect it to look similar on the exam in terms of using a moving predictor or moving average. Okay, so here we can go ahead and get started in terms of the actual formulas that we will be putting in. And so we can say range. So the easiest way, or what I like to do when you're looking to you're looking to compute like a moving average like this, is to first define the range where I want all of those formulas to be put into, right? So in this case, if we go back to this image right here, this is the range that I want to define first so that I can then put that moving predictor formula into that range. So here I can say range, and then you can see here that I'm going to have it somewhere in this column, right? So I can first say range dot offset, and then I want to move down. So right now we're at sales, right? Because that's still our anchor cell. And we want to offset a certain number down. So if I look here at this picture, well, if I'm starting at sales, how many do I want to move down? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So I want to move down 4 rows, but the only reason I'm moving down 4 rows is because n months is equal to 3 here, right? If my moving average was 2, then I would just move down 1, 2, 3. Does that make sense? Because like he specifies here in the actual practice exam, you're moving down to the n months plus 1. Okay. Does this part of it make sense to everyone? Do you remember this moving average stuff from homework 5? Okay. So here I'm going to say dot offset, and then I want to move down n months plus 1 essentially, right? So whatever the value is that's in cell C3 that we already got in n months. So I'll say n months plus 1. That's how many rows I want to move down. Now, how many columns do I want to move over? Well, I'm currently in the sales column and I want to move over into the predicted column. So I want to move 1 column in the positive direction. So I'll move 1. Yes. Yes, thank you. So here, yeah, that's a good catch. So I'll have to set that equal to something, but here, because we defined n in median to be this number of months in the moving median, that is how many I need to move down plus an extra 1 row, because it takes 3 inputs and then puts it into the 4th row. And then I'm moving over 1 column. All right. And then, so that's the first part of my range, right? So what I'm saying right here in this specific instance is I'm saying from sales, I want to offset n in median rows, so down 1, 2, 3 rows plus an extra 1 row, and then I want to move over 1 column. So this is where my moving average will start, right? So that's our first value. Well, I'm trying to get down to this final value down here, right, to define my range, because it goes 1 past in a moving average. Is that clear to everyone why it goes 1 past? Okay. And so this was the first value of my range. Remember, we said first value, comma, last value of range. So here I'm going to say comma, and then I can say dot offset from sales. I can offset, let's see, I can offset, or I could just do dot end, I think would work just fine. But no, okay. So here, what's the number of moving averages that you will be using? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And so you need to move down from sales. What amount? Well, you need to move down all the way with whatever data you have plus 1 more, because that's how you always have in moving predictors, right? So I can say dot offset, or I can just say, yeah, I'll say dot offset. And then how many months do I have? How much do I want to move down in terms of rows? I'll move down n months plus 1. And then again, I'll move over 1 column. And then I have to close my range variable here. And then I'll say that's equal to some formula. So for now, I'll just say formula is equal to high, because we haven't gotten there yet. Actually, first I'll say dot select so we can just test out and make sure we did it right. I would advise doing this because this defining the range is probably going to be a chunk of the points on here. So just once you write out the range, use dot select to check it out and make sure you did it properly. So here we can see that we've selected the right range. Does everyone understand how we got this range? All right. So now it's asking us to use the moving median. to have the actual formula. So I'm going to use formula. And then in moving averages, like you know from homework 5, you're using R1C1 specifically, relative addressing. So formula R1C1, make sure that you use this dot formula R1C1, not just dot formula. Okay, then I set that equal to something. Okay, this is something I want to stress because it's a super common error. Most people just start writing their formula right here. So for example, I can just say the formula is equal to 2, right? And then here, the value of 2 is pasted, right? What if I say the formula is equal to 2 plus 2? Then it gives me 2 plus 2, right? It's not actually computing 2 plus 2. So it's important that you put in the equals, because in Excel, you need the equals to make it into an actual equation. So here, when I say equals 2 plus 2, now it's actually computing 4. And when I click into these cells, it has the equal 2 plus 2 in there. So make sure you don't forget, because usually people type the first equal sign, then open quotations, and then they forget the second equals, and then their code doesn't run. So remember that second equals. Yes. 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 R1C1 is going to be by far the easiest method to do for specifically moving averages, because it'll literally just be this one line of code in which you define the formula, and then it works for everything. Did you use R1C1? Okay, yeah. So make sure that you do it specifically, yeah, according to R1C1. Okay, so here now, okay, so to begin with, let's say I don't know what the heck a median average actually is, right? Or like how it's used in Excel or what it's called. So I'll just test it out. Hope there's one called median, and thankfully there is. So here, this median value that I'm trying to get is these 3 values, right? Because it's a moving median. So basically, I need to be able to define something, define formulas in here that can compute these values, right? But I have to do it within VBA. And so essentially what I'm looking for is I want to set it equal to median, right? That's what I see up in my Excel formula box. And then open parentheses. And so let's just go ahead and define it for this first value, the 494. So I want to move for the median. I want to go up how many rows from 494? I want to go 1, 2, 3 rows up. So I'm going to do R minus 3. And then how many columns do I want to go over? Well, I want to move over 1 column to get this value right here. So I'll say C minus 1 as my first value of the median. And then as my last value of the median, well, here I want to go up one row. So that's R negative 1. And then I want to go over 1 column. So R negative 1, or sorry, C negative 1. Right. So here, can anyone tell me why this doesn't work for like our purposes though? Why couldn't I just leave it at this? Right. So this has to be able to work for all of the values. And so if I look into it, well, every single time I'm moving over 1 column to the left, right? That's not going to change because my data is 1 column to the left. So it looks like I can leave the C ones as is, the C negative ones. And then anytime I'm in a new value, the last value of the range. So here, this one's going to be getting input from these 3 values, right? This one will be getting input from these 3 values. And so the last value that it's looking at is always up 1 row and over 1 column. So this last value can stay as is. What changes is the first row, right? So here, I want to go to this first row. I want to go up 3 and over 1. But when I'm looking down to this next value, I want to go up 3 and over 1, right? Which is a different value. So here, this 3, we know is equal to what value, what variable? It's equal to, yes, n in med. So here we want this to be n in med, right? But here, if I just set this, I save this, it's just going to put that into my formula and it's going to be a mess. So I have to go ahead and concatenate it So I have to end my string here. I have to concatenate. I have to put this n in med variable that's within my VBA code, and then I have to concatenate and include the rest of the formula. So let's see here. If I run it, it works. Okay, yes. So right here. So let me close it out. So sales is our anchor cell, and it's our value I've set to start at n in med +1, right? So it goes down 1, 2, 3, and over +1, and then over 1. Now we need it to go to a certain range, and moving averages always go one below the last entry of your n months. And so the way that I defined this final value of the range was by, with sales, going down n months, and then going down one more, and then over. So that's how I defined this range here, right? I had the top value, which is that first part of the range, and then this bottom value. Does that make sense? Okay, yes. I would be shocked, but let's try. Okay, yeah. I mean, I would recommend you do R1C1. I guess it works because just like I was showing, like with the equals high, like it's literally just pasting this into the cell. Yeah. Now that I learned about dot value, I'm not sure. Mind blown. No, yeah. But now that you're here, use dot formula R1C1 just in case, you never know. And it shows that you know what you're doing, right? So yeah, use dot formula R1C1. Okay, so and then that's it for, oh wait, what's the last thing it says on the practice exam? It says here, any number of sales and predictions should change. Okay, we fixed that, right? Here, if I say 4, and then if I run the sub, it works as intended, right? So we see that moving average is as predicted. If I say 2 and run the sub, that's as we expect. If I look into a specific cell, it's working as I intended. Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, do formula R1C1. All right. So finally it says somewhere in this, let's see. There's something about clearing every time. I thought that's the next question. Okay, thank you. So we're literally done. Yeah, we're done with this one. So this is not a lot of code. I talked through it, so we went slower. The main point is this line. Someone asked me after the first exam, they had a lot of code, but they didn't get a lot of partial credit for a specific one. And so the question was like, okay, if I had a lot more code, why didn't I get as much credit? It's because there's specific point values for each problem, and then there's parts of problems that are very valuable because they show that you have a lot more knowledge. So in this problem, like this would be basically the biggest chunk of your points, showing that you know how to use R1C1 and that you know how to use ranges here to find a range. And so this is like, make sure you know how to do this line. How I did this, I know that I went and concatenated the variable in quickly. Does this part make sense to everyone? Or does anyone have any clarifying questions on this? Because this is the most important part of that first question. Okay. All right. Then we can move on to number 2. Okay, so I will look at this first. So Basically, it's saying it's giving you a list of passwords and it's going to ask the user for input for passwords, and then you have to determine whether or not it meets certain criteria. So in this case, the password has to have at least 8 characters, at least 2 uppercase letters, 2 lowercase. And then this whole time it's asking for a do loop until you enter a valid password. And then at the end of this, it's going to put your valid password, add it to this list of acceptable passwords, and then also output all of the bad passwords that you entered in this column C. So that was my quick overview while we're looking at the practice exam, but now we can go over into VBA code and actually work through it. So here we have our sub make password again, and asks you to place a command button. So make sure you do that and make sure you assign it. And then it says the sub will have an input box inside a do loop to get a password. Okay, so I'm going to say do. And then at the end of this code, I'm going to say loop. Okay, is that clear to everyone why I did do loop? Okay. Sometimes you can put while conditions in, but still, if you have just a plain do loop, it'll work just fine. Does anyone know what would happen if I tried to run this code right now? Infinite loop, because it would just never escape the do loop. And then your code could possibly, well, like this literally happened. I was going through the practice exam last night, working through it to see how fast I could get through it. And I left an open do loop the first time and it completely crashed everything. So, and if you don't save, then you lose everything too. So I'm going to show you a way to prevent that because you want to make sure you don't have infinite loops. So I'm going to just dim a new variable. I'll call checker for now, dim checker as integer. And then within this do loop, I'm going to say, I can say if checker is greater than, I'll say 1000, because so far nothing in this has made me think we're going to have to do more than 1000 iterations of a do loop. And then you always need your then statement. Then, well, if the checker is over 1000, then I'm going to say exit do, because I want to get out, I want to escape the infinite loop so my program doesn't crash. And then, does anyone know what would happen if I ran my code right now? There'll be an infinite loop because I'm not iterating as I go through the do loop. So then I have to say checker is equal to checker plus 1, right? So this way, if I run my code, fingers crossed, everything is still fine because it quickly just ran 1000 times and then exited my do loop. Is this clear to everyone? This isn't asked anywhere in there. I just always do it because I'm nervous that I'm going to get stuck in an infinite do loop somewhere. So it's not at all required. But I just like to do it to prevent infinite loops. Okay, so now we're in our do loop and it says you want to have an input box that asks for a password within this do loop, right? So if I'm asking for a password, I have to be able to store that password as a variable. So he's already defined up here, it looks like string pass as that value. And then we just want an input box to get input from our user. I put the open parentheses here because I'm using this as a function, right? I want it to return a value. If I just wanted to put a random, like if I wanted to put just a message box here that just said something and didn't want to get any user input, I wouldn't need to have the parenthesis. But whenever you're trying to actually get user feedback, you put that parenthesis there. Oh no. Infinite do loop. Did you not iterate? No, I did. Okay, okay, great example. This was also on the first exam. There's exit conditions, right? There's a lot of times where it's like check something, and if the user hasn't adhered by whatever rule you set out, then you just need to exit whatever you're in, right? There were a lot of instances in which people checked those conditions and then forgot to put your exit sub in there, and then it just kept going, which defeats the purpose, right? So make sure you always include your exit fors if you're in a for loop, exit sub if you're just wanting to completely be done with a sub, or here in this case exit do. So thank you for that example because it probably prevented a lot of people from doing that on Thursday. Okay, so input box, and then here I want to say enter password. You didn't specify exactly what you have to say, so I just keep a simple enter password. In this title here, make sure you put your name, okay? Don't forget, because it's I think like 1 point off if you don't do it or something. So make sure anytime that there's a title bar, you put your name. Okay, so this is going to get input from the user that says, that asks them to enter password, they can put it in. So here I can just run that so you can see. So enter password and I'll say like ABC123. And then I'm going to be stuck in a loop because I didn't think this through. Thank you. Perfect. Another great example. All right. So now we have our input and it says it's giving us these conditions, right? It's saying a password is valid if it has at least 8 characters, at least 2 uppercase letters, at least 2 numbers, right? And so we're going to need to keep track of these in variables to be able to check them. So it looks like he's defined NN as an integer and NC. So to me, that seems pretty straightforward to be the number of numbers and the number of characters in the given password. So I'll just go ahead and say here NN is equal to 0 and then NC is equal to 0. Okay. The reason that I'm doing this is because we're in a loop, right? So at the very beginning, when he dimmed these, the default value for NN as an integer is 0, right? But because we're in a loop, the second time you pass into the loop, it's not going to reset those values to check the new password, right? So each time you need to set it equal to 0 within the do loop so that you can start over that process of checking the new password that's been inputted. Yes. Checker, no, because specifically, well, here I've said checker is equal to checker plus 1, right? So the very first time it goes through my do loop, checker is equal to 1. When it exits my do loop, well, it's not going to exit my do loop because it's a do loop. So it keeps going forever and ever until it finally says exit do. So then the second time it goes through, it's checker equals checker plus 1. Well, now checker is 1, right? So we want it to equal 2. Then third time 3, 4, 5. So if I had said checker equals 0 in here, then it would be another infinite loop, right? Because every single time it's starting the do loop, it'd say, okay, checker is 0, cool. Checker is 0, cool. Checker is 0, right? And it would just keep going on and on forever. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? You're saying outside of the do loop? That's what you're saying? You're saying just checker equals 0? So every single time you're going through the do loop, then it's going to say the checker is equal to 0. Then it'll say checker equals checker plus 1. So now the checker is equal to 1. Next time you're running through it, it's just going to say checker is equal to 0. Now it's 1. So essentially every time it's going to say checker is 1, checker is 1, checker is 1. And it will never, ever increment and it will never be greater than 1,000. And you're going to have an infinite loop. Your program will crash and you'll cry, right? So, so does that help? Okay. Also the checker, like if you save a lot, you don't have to use this checker method. I just use it as kind of a fail safe. Okay, so I have those equal to 0. And then I want to, so the user has just provided an input, right? And now I need to determine how many numbers are in that input, how many uppercase letters are in that input, and what the length of that input is. So the best way for me to determine the number of numbers and the number of capital letters is to increment through each character of the input that they have, right? So I'm going to use a for loop for that. So I'll say for, let's see, I can say for int I, or maybe he's dim something. He has dim I as integer, so I can use that. For I equals 1 to the length of string pass. And then I'll have my next statement. Here you can say next I or just next, it works the same. Is everyone clear on why I just have this statement? So they'll enter a password that's of a certain length. And then I'm going to start at 1, iterate through each specific character and determine then, is it a number or is it a capital letter? Yeah. You could do either. Yeah. I'm not going to check that first because I want to first iterate through everything. And at the very end, I'll use a statement that just says check if all 3 conditions, right? So I guess your way is probably more efficient in terms of runtime, right? Because it's going to flag those passwords quicker that aren't of the right length. So either way works just fine. It's just a personal preference. So here, I'm iterating through each character, and then I need to check specifically the string of each character or the specific character to see what that is. So I'll define each character to be a value. Let's see if he's defined anything up here we can use. He's defined string C, right? So here I'm going to say string C is equal to, and then how do I get that specific value? Okay, anyone know? There's a string function where I can get the one specific character within a string. Yes, so I can use mid, right? It gives me what the inputs are, so that's nice. The string here, I'm passing in string pass. Where do I want to start? Well, I want to start at I, right? Because the first time through, I want to check the first character. Then the second time I'm going through, I want to check the second character. So where I start within the string is I. And then the length of the string, well, I just want that one character, right? So the length will be 1. Does that make sense to everyone? Why define that? Okay. Yeah. Yes. So here in my for loop, I'm going from the first character of the string to the length of the string, right? That's how many times I'll iterate through. And then inside, I'm looking at character by character, and I'm assigning that character to a variable. So here, when I go through the first time, the character is equal to, I'm taking a middle part of string pass, right? That's why I'm using the mid function. And that middle part of the string, it will start at I. So the first time through, it'll start at the first value, the first character, and it will just have length of 1 because it's just that one character. The second time, it's going to start at 2 and be just of length 1, so it's going to be 2, etc. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now that I have defined within this for loop the specific character I'm looking at, I can check my conditions, right? So the first thing it says is what? It says we can check 2 uppercase letters, okay? So I can say if string C is less than or equal to, no, let's say greater than, sorry, or equal to A, and string C is less than or equal to Z, then the number of characters is equal to the number of characters plus 1. Okay, I probably did that too fast, so I will explain. First, because I'm checking for how many uppercase letters are there, I'm saying if the string is greater than or equal to a capital A and less than or equal to a capital Z. So I'm saying if it falls anywhere in between capital A and capital Z, hence if it is a capital letter, then I'm incrementing my number of capital letters by 1. So there's different ways to do this. You can also use ASCII values. But here essentially what I'm showing is the ASCII value of capital A is equal to 65. And the ASCII value of Z is equal to 90. So this is essentially saying, because I'm using this greater than or equal to and less than or equal to value, it's turning the string variable into a value right here and comparing it to A, which has this value 65, and then it's comparing over here to 90. So you can do it this way, or you could say specifically, you could use these ASCII terms here. Yes. Equals ucase. If ucase equals true would work, but still at some point you would have to, I don't know, does ucase return false if it's anything other than a letter? I don't know. So it depends. That's something that you have to like play with, step through, see if it works. I'm not sure about ucase. I think that would probably work. It just depends on whether or not it's able to handle numbers. Yes. Number of capitals. So my number of characters is for this password is the length of the string pass, right? Because I'm going from the first character to the length, right? So if my password is ABC, then A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. So I'm going to have a for loop from the first to the third.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, sorry. NC is capitals. I just considered because it's specifically saying like it has to be uppercase letters. I'm just saying if it's a character or a capital, we'll check both at the same time. Yes. This one here. So basically it's saying here, I can say question mark string C. Oh, I have to do it during runtime. And anyone see the missing item here? If and for, oh, if there's an if here, then exit. I'm not sure. Thank you. So here, let's see. So string C, the first one that I put in is D. So it's saying string C is equal to D as a character specifically, and then it's comparing that to A. So whenever I'm comparing just a character to a character, because they're of the same type, it can turn those into numeric values, right? And compare the two. Or I guess it's not even really comparing them in terms of numeric values, but because they're of the same type and they're characters, they have those ASCII values associated with them. So you can just use this, which is essentially saying that D is greater than or equal to A, which it is, so then it will increment by NC. Does that make sense for the if statement? Sorry, I didn't see who asked. Yeah. Okay, so it specifically says you have to have, well, it's looking for uppercase letters. So you have to have at least 2. So first I'm just trying to go through and count the number that there are. And so this A has a value of 65, Z has a value of 90. So right now, this string D has a value, which is, well, if 65 is A, then 66 is B, 67 is C, 68 is D, right? So it's saying, is 68 greater than or equal to 65? Yes, it is. And is it less than or equal to 90? Yes, it is. Yes. Yep. Yep. Okay. So then I increment the number of capitals. And then, so that's my first if, but then I can say else if, right? Because there's a chance that this is not a uppercase letter. And so I can say else if, and then specifically, I want to check if it's a number, right? So I can say else if string C is greater than or equal to 0. And string C is less than or equal to 9. Then NN is equal to NN plus 1. Okay, yes. So here we're looking at 2 uppercase letters. And so I'm trying to determine whether or not this specific character is uppercase for each character. So I'm checking, is it in between the values of capital A and capital Z? And if so, the way ASCII works is lowercase, well, all of the capitals are together, right? It's capital A, capital B, capital C. And so if it's a capital letter, it's going to be in between these 2 values. So that's why I picked A and Z, but specifically the capitals, right? Because if I chose lowercase a and lowercase z, then that's checking whether or not it is a lowercase letter. Yep. All right. So if, else if, and if. Is everyone good with, oh, no, we're not good with this. Yes. No. So here specifically, this is like, if I said equals 0 here, we would have issues because it's trying to compare this character to a number, which it can't be done. So I'm specifically changing it to make sure everything is a character because you can compare a character to a character. Okay. I guess I can just quickly step through to see where everything is good. So we can say A, B, C, D, E. Oh, wait, no, we should have some numbers. 1, 2, 3. So A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. So the first character is A. It's checking if it's in between capital A and capital Z. So is it a uppercase letter? Yes, it is. So then my number of caps increases by 1. Then it checks, is it a number? Well, no, it's not even checking that because this is an else if and we already entered the if. So that ends. Then we go to the second character, right? So now we're going through for I equals 2. I'm looking at the second character, which is B. It's a lowercase b, so it's not going to meet this criteria of being in between uppercase A and uppercase Z, so it'll skip that. It doesn't meet the criteria of being a number between 0 and 9, so it'll skip that. Then it goes to the next one, right? And it proceeds like so until you get to I is equal to string pass, the length of string pass, which is 6, and then it ends. Yes. If they, what do you mean? An ASCII?
So let's say like enter a dash, and that's the ASCII value.
Which one do you think it would work through?
For the else if string C greater.
So this is specifically checking. There's only 10 values in between 0 and 9. So, and those are taken up by just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's no dash within there. So it wouldn't meet that criteria. Does that make sense? Do you understand why the dash would not work? Okay. Yes. Yeah, for the second one, you can do is numeric. Yeah. That works. And then here, similarly, sorry, I may have confused you with doing characters to characters. To me, it's the fastest way possible. You could also do like the ASCII value of string C, right? That'll return an actual value. And then here you don't have, that doesn't have to be a character, right? You can then just actually compare it numerically.
During the test, will we have a table of the ASC?
No, but the immediate value is your friend because you can say ASCII of whatever you want. So you can say ASCII of lowercase a and it returns that value. The summary sheet, it says how, like it says ASCII, just what it is, ASC, but it doesn't give you like a whole table of those values. Also, great reminder, print your summary sheets, bring them, do not forget. It's different for exam 2. So some people, when I took it, brought their exam 1 summary sheets to exam 2, and it's not nearly as holistic. So make sure that you bring the updated summary sheet. Okay, so we checked all of those conditions. We ended our if statement. Now, because we've checked all the conditions, we can exit that for loop. And so we're good to go. Now I want to check whether or not the conditions are met, right? Because at the end of all of this, I'm left with the number of numbers in the password and the number of capitals in the password. So I want to check if NC is greater than or equal to 2, right? That's what it says. You need to have at least 2 capital letters. And then I want to say if NN is greater than or equal to 2, because it says you need to have 2 or more numbers. And then I can do another and finally it says it needs to have at least 8 characters. So here I can just say if length of the string is greater than or equal to 8. So this is the condition in which they've entered a good password, right? Then I always forget my then statements, but thankfully the little red error pops up. Okay. So right here, I just checked whether or not it's valid. If it's valid, what do I do? Well, yeah. Yep. So I exit do because it says
have an input box that continuously asks for passwords until a valid password is entered, then exit the do. So I can exit here. Otherwise, else if. I have to actually put what I want to do otherwise, or I guess I can just say else, right? Because you either have a valid password or you have an invalid password. And I can say else. Now here's where I'm going to go back just so that you can see closer, or you can see in more detail specifically what he's asking for here, because here's where we start dealing with arrays. So it says when the valid password is entered, it'll be added. Okay, we're not going to deal with that yet. We're not going to deal with printing because unless there's something that specifies you have to print within the loop. For me, I always prefer to print at the end if at all possible to just prevent errors. And so here it says, let's see, the loop will be executed until a valid password is entered. Okay, that's why we exited our do. And then it says the invalid passwords entered will be stored in a dynamic array. Okay, so that's what we have to do within our else is store these invalid passwords in a dynamic array. So else, and then when we talked about arrays, when you talked about arrays in class, what's happening when we're looping through things is the dimension of the arrays change, right? Because like if the first time through I enter 3 bad passwords and then 1 good password, the size of this array will be 3. But if the next time I enter 5 bad passwords, then 1 good one, the size of the array will be 5, right? So first I need to just have a variable that will tell me how long will this array be, or how many values will be in this array. And so let's see if he has something up here. He has int n that we haven't used yet, I don't think. No. So I'm going to use int n. Int n, and I'm going to say equals int n plus 1. And so basically, the first time it goes through, it's going to check all those conditions for a specific password. If it's a good password, it'll come in here and exit the do. But if it's not a good password, then it's going to increase this size of the array by 1, or it's just going to increase this variable that I will use for the size of the array by 1. And then what I can do is I can actually dim the array, or in this case, because it's a loop, do you remember the keywords that you use for an array when it's dynamic? Yes, redim. And then preserve. Can anyone explain the difference between when you use preserve and when you don't use preserve? Yes. Right. Right. So you use preserve when you want to keep everything that was previously in the array the next time you go through the loop. And so in this case, the second time you have a bad password, well, you want to keep in your array both the first bad password and the second bad password. You don't want to start over with the default values every time. So this is a case in which you do use preserve. There are times that you don't use it when each time you start over and you're just trying to change the length of this array. But this is a case in which it's important to preserve the value. So you can say redim, preserve, and then let's see if he defined a variable up here to be, he has string bad p. So I can say string bad p, and then I can have it be inside the parentheses, that is the length of the array, right? The size of the array, I guess I should say. And so we just define that size to be int n. Okay, does everyone understand up to here how specifically, I mean, this is going to be for sure on your exam, is having redim and figuring out whether or not you use preserve and being able to change the size of it. So are these keywords clear to everyone? Yes. Yes. So here, specifically, if I just dimmed an array here, it would look something like this: dim string bad of 0, or I could say of 2. And then in this case, it would create an array that has 2 values and their default values. So to begin with, it would just be the first value is 0, the second value is 0. When you say redim, what you're saying is you're using this similar array, but you're changing the size of that array. So that's what makes it a dynamic array. That's why you redim instead of just dim. Does that make sense? And then the preserve part is you're saying that whenever you're coming in, for example, and putting in the 4th value of the array, it's saying, if you just said redim, it's going to enter in that fourth value, but knock everything else out and put it back to the default value of 0. So you'll have 0, 0, 0, 4, 0, right? And so it's important to preserve it to keep all the bad passwords. And then finally, you have the actual name of the array. So in this case, we define this as a string because it's a variable filled with strings. And then the size of that array, that's why we use the parentheses, and it's int n. So int n is keeping track of how many bad passwords we've created. So when you come in the fourth time with the fourth bad password, it's creating this string bad array of size 4 while keeping the previous 3 values inside of the dynamic array. Okay, yes. Yes, in this case, it's a beautiful case where you don't really need to use option based, but essentially here, if you, okay, so the default is 0. So the first value, the index of the first element in your array has the index value of 0. And so option based 1, you can type at the top up with your option explicit if it's easier for you to always have things start at 1 instead of 0, which is sometimes helpful because like functions like length start at 1. So like in this case, you're not really like counting things in that way, so you don't need to use option based 1. Yes.
And the reason, or maybe I think because when we have to print this, we're gonna just have to take for I to like,
Right.
and then like,
But so here's the thing. It's like,
but
It's-
since it's not starting at 0, since we're starting like at
right,
0.
right. Because at the end of the day, when I want to print this array, I can just start it at print the value at 1, for example, or I can start it at print the value of I minus 1 to give me that first value. Like, I'm gonna code it and then I can walk you through like why. Let me just type this next line and then we can see that specifically. So I'm going to then say within this array, I have to actually assign the new bad password to a value. So I'm going to say to the int n element in string bad p, I'm going to set it equal to the string password, right? Because this is the bad password. So in this case, the first time it comes through, int n is 0 and it's immediately changed to 1, right? Int n is changed to 1 and the size of this array is 1. So it's going to put it in the first value and I don't even have to mess with option based 0 whatsoever. So if here I did something like int n plus, or just int n, and then I iterated down here, then when I refer to the values later on, I would use option based 0. Does that make sense? I can go over it in details after too. Yes.
Is there a method?
Yes, but the easiest way would be probably looping, right? Just looping and iterating through the number of values. Yeah, upper bound minus lower bound, but no, because does that return values? Oh, yeah, then you do upper bound minus lower bound. Yes, you're right. Okay. All right. Else we set that equal to the bad password, and then I can end my if statement. And then now I can end my loop, right? Because I've checked. So first I've asked for a value, then I've gone through and I've seen the number of capitals and everything, the length and the number of numbers. And then I check whether or not it's valid. If it's valid, I exit. And if it's not valid, then I add it to my dynamic array. And then once I'm done with that, once I've exited the loop, then I can move on to actually printing these values. Okay, and we can go into depth about arrays too after. I want to get to 3 and 4 as well, but so far so good. Okay. Now we have to actually print these values. So it says when a valid password is entered, the password will be added to the end of the list of existing passwords on the first column of the worksheet. So basically it wants you to add it right here. So I can just simply say range of A1 dot end XL down dot value. No, I have to say dot end XL down. That's going to put me right here, right? So I can't just paste over this value. Then I can say dot offset. How many rows down do I want to go? 1, and then 0 over. And I can say dot value is equal to, and then this will be string pass. So let's see. If I enter one of these good ones, my pass 23x. Pass 23x. We did something. Sorry, say that again. Yes, thank you. Do and if loop. Okay, so exit do. Anyone see why you can step through it? No, it still has that final value, which would be, you're exiting the do when you have a correct value. So that's why we're using string pass here, because that would still be the correct value. Let's see, if I go to checking, run it up to here, and I can say my pass 23x, or make it easier, AA 23 34. Okay. So it's thinking that it's a bad password. NC greater than or equal to 2, NN is equal to 0, numbers. Oh, sorry. Okay, so up here I changed in between. I'm comparing. Yep. So I did not change it back after showing the bad example, sorry. Thank you. Okay. Thank goodness. Thanks for helping me troubleshoot. Okay. So, are y'all good with the character stuff? Okay. Okay, now it says now we have to deal with when the valid password is entered, then we need to also write all of the invalid passwords. And so basically what this is saying is we need to print out each value within our array. And so here I can say I want to specifically print it in range in the column C, right? So first I can say range, or because I'm printing the values of an array, I'll use a for loop first. So for I, does he use I already? J, okay. Wait, he uses J? Oh, okay. So I think I can use I, because in a for loop, I'm going to define it immediately to be something, so it won't mess with any other I that I have. So for I equals 1 to, how far am I going? Anyone know? Yeah, I'm going to the length of the string, but what is the length of the string? We have a specific variable defined as this. I defined int n to be the length, right? So that's what I'm going to use, just because I said every single time there's a bad password, increase int I by 1. So the length of this dynamic array is int n. Okay. Then I'll have a next, so I don't forget it. Next I. Then within here, I want to actually print the value of the array. So I'll say in C1 dot, I want to go to dot offset. And then let's see. So here I want to go down the number of columns of bad passwords that I have. So like if I have one bad password initially, I don't need to go down at any rows at all. if I have two bad passwords, the second time I need to go down two. And so the way that I can get through that is I can say dot offset I minus 1 comma 0. So the first time it goes through, I is equal to 1. So it'll offset it I minus 1, 1 minus 1 times. So 0, it will go 0 down. The second time I is 2. So I'm going to offset it 1 row down. So it's 2 minus 1, 1 row down would print it here. Does that make sense to everyone? So essentially I'm saying that I have I to int n, right? So let's say I have 3 bad passwords, int n is equal to 3. So the first time that I go through, I'm starting at this range C1 and I'm going to offset it I minus 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, right? So I'm not going to offset it at all. It's going to be dot offset 0, 0, 1 here. The next bad password I want to print here. So I'm going to go down 1 row, which is I minus 1, 2 minus 1 in this case, which is 1. So it's just going to keep printing them down until it's the last bad password. Yes. Zero. Well, then the very first time, if you have I plus 1, then it will have you offset it by 1, right? So then your first value would be printed here, and then it would go down from there. So I'm just having it to where it starts at the C1 instead of C2. But yeah, that would work. And then if you wanted to offset it up another one, you could do that too. So as long as it's printing in the right place, it's fine. This is just the way I chose to do it. You can do it differently. There's not just one right way. So here I've offsetted it, and then I want to set it equal to the value of the bad password. So I can put the name of the array and then the specific value of the array that I want to get. So here I can say set it equal to 1. Why do I set it equal to 1? Because earlier on I set int n to start at 1 and I assigned it that first bad password value. So I'm getting that value first. See, there's still okay. This is the arrays. It gets a little confusing, but so there technically is a 0 like element of my array, but I define int n to be 1, and then I defined the int n element, the first element of the array, to be equal to my first bad password. So this 0 is still over here, but it doesn't matter because when I go to print, I'm starting and printing at this first value of it. Does that make sense? So if I use option-based 1, that'd work just the same. It would just get rid of the 0 value, but it doesn't matter right now. Like if I went and printed the 0th value of this array, it would give me an element of 0, which is not a bad password, but it doesn't matter in this case because I'm not printing that. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So we have that, and then we have our next I, and then the very last thing is it says go ahead and clear the bad passwords every single time. And so just at the very top, I can go ahead and say range C1 dot entire column dot clear. All right. Then I can try things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which shouldn't work. I can try things like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then 1, 2, 3, but there's no uppercase letter, so it shouldn't work. Then I can try one of the good ones like a 50-yard line, and this should work. I hit OK. It prints my 2 bad ones here, and it prints my 1 good one here. So it works as intended. All right. So I do want to make sure that we have time for 3 and 4. So we'll move on in terms of specifically the array specifics, but I will be available after to talk about any array specifics that you have questions about, or if you have just like a simple question on it now, we can go over it. But any questions about this part? Yes. Yes. The bottom line here. All right. Any other questions for this one for now? All right. So next is functions. So this is easy money, and you can easily get points on this as quickly as possible. So we'll breeze through this, hopefully. All right, I'll go to it on the practice exam. So it says you're going to create a function string ADDR that will, it's going to take in a string variable and a range variable, and it should return a string. And so it's going to use a for each loop. Usually functions use for each loops if you're defining a full range and looking for specific values. And then you're going to check something. So let's see, it's going to check if it matches the value of one of the cells in the range. So basically it's saying, given a string variable, is that string variable somewhere within the range? And then if so, it's going to return the content of the cell immediately to the left of the matching cell. And if it doesn't match, then you're going to print out this text not found along with the address of the first cell in the range. Okay, so that's the overview of what this is. It can show, like you can see here, they typed in a function down here, the function, and they said the first parameter is John. So they're looking for John within this range. Do they find John anywhere? Yes, John is right here. So the function returns the value to the left of it, which is Mary, which is why this value is Mary. It'll become more clear when I actually do it live, but that's the idea. So I'll go over to VBA now. I can go to problem 3. No, so functions are not subroutines. So you don't use it. You use the function keyword. And so you'll have function and then you'll have end function to end it rather than sub and sub. All right. So here, all right. So the first thing we have to do is actually write the name of the function to get it started. And so this is what we talked about right before we started, but basically you have to start with the keyword function. And then the first thing you type is the variable that you want the function to return. So in this case, he specified string address, right? String ADDR. Then open parentheses. Now you put the input that he wants to get. And so in this case, he says he wants a string variable. So I'll say string in as string. Make sure you put the type. And then secondly, he says it should receive a range variable. And so here I can say, also call it range in as range. Okay. Is everyone clear on this first line? And then finally, before I forget, you're returning the variable string address, and then you have to return it as a specific type. And so it says it should return a string, so you have to add string at the end. So this is something that you have to have memorized, right? Because there won't be like anything to aid you on how to write this first and last line of the function, which is crucial to make sure the function can actually work. So make sure that like you have this ingrained in your head. It starts with function, then it's the name of the return variable, then it's the parameters, then you have to specify the type of the return variable. And then it'll generate this end function, and all of our code will be within this. Any questions on the first line? Make sure you're comfortable with that. Okay. So now we get to what it actually wants us to do. So it says the function should use a for each loop to determine if the string variable passed is equal to one of the cell values in the range variable passed as an argument. So I can say for each, and then I have to iterate. I have to have some kind of iterator to go through each cell within the range. So I'm just going to call that iterator cell. And I'll say for each cell in what range am I looking in? Well, I'm looking in this range in that I asked for from the user, right? So I'll say for each cell in range in, and then I'll have next cell at the end. And so this cell is the iterator value, but because it's an actual cell, I need to define it as a range. And so up here, I'll say dim cell as range, okay? And then within here, I'll be checking whether or not that cell matches each value of the range. Do you guys understand cell, how I'm using it? I'm using it as an iterator, and I have to define it. You can define it like we talked about earlier, either as a variable or as an object. Make sure you don't just define it as a string or an integer. It won't work because this is specifically something you're iterating through a smaller piece of the range within a range. Does this make sense to everyone? Okay. So now that we are going through cell by cell, right? So let's say, for example, this is our range in. right here, this is our range in. If we're iterating through each cell, basically what it's saying is it's checking for each cell. So Peter is a cell, Mark is a cell, Simon is a cell in range in. It'll go through all of them. And what we need to check is if these names are equal to a specific string, specifically the string in, right? So we can say if cell dot value is equal to string in, then, right? And so what do we do then? Well, basically we just need to say, okay, there is a match somewhere. So for now, because it's not just asking us to return true if it's in there, it's asking for us to return something to the left. It's a little more involved. For now, I'm just going to set a Boolean equal to true if this is the case, right? So I'll say Boolean of m is equal to true. So up above, I need to dim a Boolean here. And so what is the default of a Boolean? Anyone know? False, right? So for each cell, it's going to go through, and by default, at the beginning, it's false. And it will only turn true if the cell value is equal to the string that the user inputted. Does that make sense? All right. So now, well, what do we do if it's not true? Well, okay. So what is the fatal flaw that I just made that a lot of you made on the first exam? One. No, but that's a good one. It is right now. I just found that the cell matches, but yeah, but I need to exit it because I've determined that it has already matched, right? So I need to exit my for. In this case, it would just iterate through again, but it may get confusing if like there's another one in there and then it finds that second one. So in this case, it wouldn't have messed you up too much, but it doesn't need to keep checking because all it's asking is determine if it's equal to one of the cell values. So once you find a cell value, then you can just exit your for loop. All right, so that's the if, and then we have we can simply just end it there. All right, so now we've determined whether or not something matches, and we have a Boolean value that's going to be false if it iterated through every single cell value and it never matched the string, or it'll be true if one time it did actually match. And so here, now I can actually work with that, and I can say if, sorry, I need to finish my for next loop here. Okay, so now I can actually check, and I can say if that Boolean is equal to true, then every time, then we're going to do something. I don't know what for now. We'll come back to that. And then else we're going to do something. And then we're going to end our if statement, and then we can end our function. I guess I didn't really follow the comments here. See example. Okay, so now if there is a match, what does it want us to do? So it says, I can go ahead and move it down here actually. So if it matches, then it says the function should return the contents of the cell immediately to the left of the matching cell. So here is to clarify from earlier why it's important that you immediately exit the for loop, because if you keep going through the for loop, then it's going to keep checking each cell. And then at the end, you're just gonna your final cell will be the last cell on the range. And we're here talking about getting an address of that cell. So it's not going to help us versus if we find the matching cell and then we exit the for loop, that cell value will remain the cell where we found the match. It'll make sense when I code it here. But so we checked if it's true. If it is true, then I can say string addr, which is our output, right? It's the return that we're looking for from this function. I can say it's equal to, first I'm looking at the range, and then I can say specifically, no, sorry. I can say cell, right? That's my iterator when I exited the loop. And I can say cell.offset, and it says 1 to the left, right? So it's going to be 0 rows changed, 1 column to the left. The left is the negative direction, so -1. And then I can say dot value, and it'll return whatever is to the left of the matching cell. So if the string was Abraham and I go through I'm iterating through each one, I'm iterating, and then it finally finds Abraham, then it will have the value and it will offset it by 1. So it's going to go cell offset 0, -1 and return Joseph. Okay. Does that make sense? The logic of it? Okay. And then next or else it says if it's not found, then the function should return the Excel relative address corresponding to the top left cell of the range. And so this is pretty straightforward. You can just use the resize property to get the top left value of it. So I can just set, again, you want to make sure that you actually set it equal to the variable that is what the function is called. And you can just use, I'm looking at the range that I have. So range in, and I can resize that as 1, 1. Do you guys remember that when you have offset, it's based on 0, right? Because it's like, if you don't want to move at all, you offset, you do dot offset 0, 0, right? And then you can change from there. Resize has it where the top left value that you have is 1. So it's in row 1 and column 1, and then it goes from there. So when I'm resizing it to be 1, 1, it's going to just take that top left value of the range. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you guys remember going over resizing class? Okay. So I can resize it to be 1, 1. And then it asks for specifically the address. And so I can get that address. And then here it will ask, am I looking for absolute values? And in this case, let's see. No, I don't want it to be absolute values because if I move the cell to a new location, I still want it to work. And so here I can say false, false. And then it says, what's next? It says, and the message text not found. So I can say, and text not found. I think it says to put like a dash or something. Dash text not found. And then I end my if statement, and then I end my function down here. Yes. I don't think so. Let's try. Let's see if we did this correctly. So string addr. Let's say I want to look for mark in here, and then I want to choose this whole range. Mark goes to Peter. Okay, now let's try it without false, false. Mark, and then out the whole range. It works, yeah, so it's fine. I don't know if he emphasized false, false in class. So I don't know if he thinks it is. Thank you. X not found. Close. Okay, so here you can see it returns the address with absolute values because we didn't clarify that it's not absolute values. And so when you do false and false, it changes that to simply be oh. There we go, text not found. Okay, thank you. So here, I guess in his example, he probably has, yeah, he has C3 text not found. So because he has C3, he's not using absolute. And so you should use the parentheses and say false and false. If you said, for example, false and then true, it would have $C and then 3. If you had true and then if you had false and then true, it would be $3. Does that make sense? Okay. So in this case, it's false, false, because the example he gives you doesn't have any of the $signs. It's not using the absolute value. Okay. Any questions on this one? Yes.
So if you entered in any of the numbers,
Blank, yes. And he didn't clarify, so what to do for that. So yeah, it's fine. How would I return what?
So let's say
Oh, yes. I mean, what you would do is then you would have a subcondition that would say it would first get this value right here. And then you would check if the value is equal to blank. And then if so, you could change it accordingly. But it's not going to be that involved for most likely a function. But yeah, you would just need additional if statements. And so then you'd start using relative addressing too, right? You'd go up one row and you'd go over 2 columns to do that for each of these characters. Okay, anyone else? All right. It's best to practice. We went over before the review. It's if you do a my sum or my average one or any Excel function that you know or that you use, you can just write the code for it yourself to practice. It's helpful and you can get faster at it before the exam if you have time. Okay. So now we can do the final problem. So write VBA code that does the following. So I'll go ahead and look at this in VBA. So when the Excel file opens, and this, I guess I could do full screen. Okay, so now is your chance. People always want to put code outside of modules in the first part of the class, and it's always like points off and a mess to grade. Now's your chance to finally actually put it there, and it's supposed to be there. So it says, when the Excel file opens, call a subroutine called get information. Well, he's already defined the subroutine get information here. So this is an event handler, right? This is the 4th part of your exam that he's going to test you over. So this workbook, if you go here, you scroll down right here. Do you see where it says workbook? You click that. And then there's a bunch of event handlers over here. So it happened to already populate for me this sub workbook open, which is nice because that's what I'm wanting to use. But this gives you a whole bunch of options. So it's like, for example, right before you close the workbook, if you want to do something, you can select that, right? So you have a whole menu of options, but this simply just says call a subroutine. So it's as simple as just saying call, what was it? Get information. That's all you have to do. So if I step through this right now, call get information, it directs me into my module, into my sub that is get information. Okay. Is that good with everyone? Does everyone understand where you go to find an event handler? Okay. Yes. Yes. So here, it's first asking us to have an action when the Excel file opens. And so because it's when the Excel file opens and not a specific sheet, I'm going to just go into this workbook, that file. Okay, so I'm in here. And then it's going to be blank at first. And there's this little general tab up above. And you'll click workbook. And then you'll have a bunch of event handlers to choose from. So in this case, we'll choose workbook open. And it creates this sub here in which we'll call get information. Is that clear? Okay, awesome. So we did this, and then it says, in this sub, use an input box to ask the user his or her name and store it in a string variable. So I'll call it string username UN is equal to an input box, and I'll say, what is your username? And then I'm going to put my name because I don't want to lose any points. And then I'll close it. All right. And I store it in a string variable. Okay, so because I'm storing it in a string variable, I should dim the string variable up here. Okay, so it looks like we've addressed A for now. It may ask for future changes, but we're good for A. Next, okay, any questions about that? All right, so next it's in the sub get information, use a for each loop to make a list of the worksheets in the workbook and display a message box with the lists. Okay, so I want a for each loop. So for each, I'll say worksheet in worksheets. So here I'm defining worksheet to be an object, or I guess this is similar to how cell I used to be arranged. Worksheet I define to be an object. So I have to actually dim that. So I'll say dim worksheet as object. And then in worksheets, okay, so you know how previously we always said in and then the name of the range, the total range we wanted to look at. Here, Excel already defines worksheets as the array of all of the worksheets that are currently in the active sheet. So you can just say worksheet in worksheets. That's why you notice we have this VB case. As soon as I finish typing in and hit enter, it capitalizes because it recognizes that that's the set of all of the worksheets currently in the workbook. Okay, good with that. All right, so then as always, we need a next to end it out, and we'll say next worksheet. So now within the for loop, we need to say, did I do? Yeah, okay. We'll say we need to have some string that will basically be the concatenation of each of these elements. So I'll call it string worksheet, and I'll have it be equal to, well, it needs to be additive every time. So it'll be the previous string worksheet plus, or not plus, sorry, because it's a string, we'll concatenate and then what we'll do is we can type the worksheet name. So here I can say worksheet.name, and then I want a comma after that. So I can say and comma space. And then up top, I need to define string worksheet as a string. All right. So is this part clear to everyone? Yes. Yeah. Yes. So my idea of this, of doing this first, is I'm going to iterate through each one and get, basically this will be, right now this is adding it up. So if there's prob1, prob2, prob3, string WS will be prob1, comma, prob2, comma, prob3. And then down below the for loop, I'm going to then have a new string that I set equal to worksheets : and concatenate it. Because what I don't want is to put I don't want to put worksheets : here, because then I'm going to have worksheets : problem 1, worksheets : problem 2, right? Which is not how the example looks. I don't know. He may have done it earlier or something like that in his code. But for me, I think at the end is the best way. Just make sure you're not including that in the loop. Does that help? Okay. So, and now it says, what does it say? Display a message box with the list. Okay, so here I can say message box. Okay, do I need a parentheses here or no? Anyone know? No, because I'm not getting user input. So I can just say here is where we can use the worksheets, right? I can say worksheets space, and now I want to input what I just found. So string worksheet. And then does he say anything else? I think that's it. Okay, and string worksheet. And then I can say VB information is the type, because I'm not trying to get anything from the user, or there's no OK buttons or cancel buttons. And then for the title, I'll put my name. So I guess we can just check this out. See, what is your username? ABC123. Prob1, prob2, prob3. Okay. Here there's a comma. Don't get bogged down in the comma unless he specifically talks about it, because in loops, it's always going to be, you have a final value. Don't get into the specifics too much. I'm not going to take off any points if I see there's some random comma there, unless he makes a big deal out of the comma and things like that. So clearly this is working as intended. All right. So does everyone understand this for each loop that we did with the worksheets? Do you understand? This is the iterator object. This is a preset set of worksheets. It's in Excel, it's hard coded, or it's something that's within VBA. And then I'm concatenating the string each time to get the name of each of these specific objects, each of these specific worksheets. And then at the end, I'm putting the message box to relay that to the user. Yes. Yes, so here it's just the symbol. So here, or I guess there's no symbol. Let's see. I haven't done it yet. So it's this little I is VB information. So you don't have to have this. You didn't specify it. You can always just do the comma and then another comma to skip that case if it's not required. So here in this case, there's nothing, no symbol. It doesn't matter unless he specifies that it should have that symbol. Okay. Now it says when the file is about to be closed, show a message box that reads, user, you spent number of minutes working on the workbook. Okay, where the user is the username given with the Excel file, when the Excel file was opened, and it's the number of minutes elapsed. Okay, so it's saying once you first open the workbook, start a timer basically, set that time to something. Then when you're finally going to close the workbook, trigger an event that gets the time then and gives back the past time. And so here, because it says, it literally tells you when the file is about to be closed, you know that you go back to this workbook, right? And you need an event handler. So I'll say workbook again. I can go here. I have all of my choices, and one of them is before close. So I mean, usually it'll tell you, it'll be pretty clear which one it's going to be. I think most common, there's some in your summary sheet, but most common is workbook open or before close or a selection change, things like that, that you will be using. So you don't need to really like memorize every single event handler. Usually it'll be very apparent which one you should choose. So if I choose before close here, then what does it say to do? Let's see. It says, user, you spent number of minutes working on this workbook. So first I'm going to say message box. User, you spent number of minutes working on this workbook. Right now I have to actually put in the values for this. So first for the user, it wants actually the username, right? And so I'm going to use that string username that I defined earlier, but now I'm accessing this in a different file, right? Right now I'm accessing this in this workbook rather than within the module. So I need it to be able to transfer between the two. So I need to make it a public variable, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so I'm going to go back to my module where I first defined this dim string un as string, right? Right now, I define this to just be used within this specific subroutine, right? So what I can do is I can get rid of that dim right there. I can go to the very top of my module and I can say dim string username as, well, I should make it public, right? As string, let's see, public, just public, right? I think that is what I should do. Oh, yeah, dim as public variable, public string as string. Okay, so you don't dim it here by saying public, you're dimming it. Does this make sense? Yes, because it is a public variable, you have to define it at the top, so that you can use, so we would be able to use this string un in any of these subroutines or within any of these sheets that we want to have event handlers on. So now I can go back to this workbook and I can say string un. So that will get the username, and I can say and comma, you spent number of minutes, we're going to have to do some work there, and then working on this workbook. So how do I want to do this? Spent this number of minutes working on this workbook. So this is where we need to get the actual number. So if you remember from the first review and also from the first exam, I don't know if you guys had to, do you remember if you had to do the elapsed time on the first exam? Yeah, so it's very similar here where you're going to take the current time, which is just, there's an Excel VBA function here, timer, and you're going to subtract it from the time when you started. So I'm going to define that to be a variable T0. So that's the elapsed time. And then I'm going to divide it by 60 because the default is to give that time in seconds and I want it in minutes. So I will divide it by 60. Here I need to have an and symbol. Let's see. And here I need to have an and symbol. Okay, so here, this timer function is fine. It'll work as intended. Right before close, it'll get the time, but I need to define the single time zero as when I first open the workbook. And so you have two options. You could either define it right in here, but be careful, do not define it down here below get information, because the way this works is when you open your workbook, it's going to call get information. So it will then immediately send the code over to the module and specifically to the get information subroutine, and it will never come back to this event handler. So this line of code will just be left unread forever. So you could either put it here, or because it's calling get information, you can also just code it within get information itself, because like I showed before, when you open your workbook, the first line of code is that it's going to call get information, and when you do that, it's going to immediately go to get information. So I'm going to define my variable here. Because it's a variable I'm using across a workbook and the module code, I'm going to define it as a public variable. So I'll say public single T0 as single up top, okay? It will reset the project. It's usually going to tell you that when you have a public variable, because it's affecting multiple parts of your code. And so I've defined it up here. And then when I go down to get information, the very first thing I'm going to do so that no time elapses is I'm going to say that the single T0 is equal to timer. So it's going to go here into the subroutine first. It's going to hit this line of code, and it's going to say the single T0 value is equal to the timer at this moment of time. Then it's going to do all your other code, everything else in the workbook. And then when I'm finally finished grading and I go to close your workbook, then it will say, it will go over to this workbook before close, and it's going to take the time at the end of when I'm done grading your exam. It'll subtract the time when I started grading and divide it by 60 to give me the total number of minutes. So I know I kind of jumped around because you have to go between workbooks, but does this make sense to everyone of how we modified the very same thing you did in exam one? It's just now single T0, or that's what I like to define my initial time, is a public variable. So timer here is not a variable that I defined. Timer, yeah. So it's just VBA has something called timer that when you use it, it tells you the exact time. And it's like seconds from midnight or something like that. Yes. Yes. And again, like if you usually like I'll take off the point or whatever if none of them have it. So it's not the biggest deal if you forget one, but try and use them. Don't forget to use them throughout, but it's not like a fatal flaw if you forget to put your name on one of them. Okay. So let's see. I guess I can save this here. I can close this. String UN and you spent timer, cool, single time 0. Oh, because I haven't opened the workbook and minutes working on the workbook. Okay. Well, hopefully I can get to this. Anyone know how to open File Explorer on this? Thank you. All right, 8:55, perfect. Okay, so when I open it up, it says, what is your username? I'll say Joseph. Okay, it immediately tells me problem 1, problem 2, problem 3. And then let's see if I close it. Something's going on here. So string username Joseph, and you spent timer minus single time 0 divided by 60 and minutes working on this workbook. You want to see what I could have done. Message box. Oh, it's because here, yeah, it's the VB, and this is where I would have put like the VB information. So here, when I put the comma, it's wanting me to put the, thank you, good catch, like what style it's going to be. So here's where I could put like VB information, or I could just put the comma that I don't want to have it there. So it was not liking that I had quotes in there. And then my name. Okay. I was trying to close. Yeah, and I spent not very many minutes at all working on this workbook. Okay. Any questions? Yes. Yes. For single? I'm not sure. I always use single, and I know that like I've been working on things for well, like an hour or so. And when I check it, like the time is still correct in minutes. Let's see. Single variable limitation. 5 characters. Should be fine. Yeah, I don't think you're gonna be spending if it's in seconds. Yeah, you should be fine. Yep. Okay. So that is the practice exam. Any questions before I stop the recording? Then we can go over anything specifically. All right, awesome. Thank you.